Can you guys, can you hear me okay? I just wanted to make sure. I hear this awful ringing sound. It's kind of loud around here, so I figured I'd put these on. I think I'll be okay. All right, guys, let's go ahead and let's learn perspective drawing for those that missed or those that just want to expand their minds. Yeah, we are going to be learning about drawing in perspective, what that means, and what are the strategies for doing so. So take a look here. This building, probably drawn by an architect, designed by an architect. We had this discussion in class today about the differences between an architect and an engineer. I think an architect is coming up with this layout and floor plan. The engineer is kind of making sure that dream is a reality. But having a good solid foundation for art and appreciation for that definitely helps get your ideas on paper. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like you to take a look at these lines, and I'd like you to compare and contrast that to what we did in the previous lesson. In the previous lesson, we learned about oblique and isometric drawings. Remember, if I'm drawing like a cube or a die and three-dimensionally, obliquely, I start by drawing a square, and then I add the receding angle, and then the top and the side. If I'm drawing isometrically, I start with the corner, I add my receding angle out this direction, my receding angle out that direction, and then the sides and the top. All these lines that look parallel are parallel. Perspective is different. The top and bottom in isometric, we have this top view, the side view, and the front view. With isometric, these are all parallel lines, but here, it's not necessarily the case. We have the objects here kind of shift between being, down below our eye line, up above our eye line, and kind of right directly on our eye line. And they all behave differently. So what I'm going to go over today is the strategies for drawing perspective, but first let's break down the lines that are in this drawing. You'll notice that all three of these drawings, oblique, isometric, and perspective, have these vertical lines that are kind of like the foundation for all the other lines in the drawing. So we have these vertical lines that are going all over the place. We also have lines that look like they're headed off to the distance. And so if I click here and we draw a line down through this, okay, and then we pick any other line, maybe the edge of the sidewalk here, and send that out, straight out from where it's headed there. That line crosses. Now what's cool is if I take any other line, like look at the left side of the sidewalk, and you follow that edge a little bit out further, it's heading right for that point as well, okay? And you can see all these lines headed that direction. However, there is another set of lines that's headed off to a different point. So let's take a look at this roof area. I'm going to make this a little shorter so I don't. Yeah. The roof area right here. Grab my pen, my line tool. If I trace this roof area out, heading down this way like so, you can see that this is slanted somewhere else. And this line also follows that same pattern. Now, this gap here, it may not look different, but it is actually different. And if I follow this line here, which is kind of tough to do, let's try one of these. How about this one? You can see that these lines that are further down in the frame, they're all snapping in the program. These lines are also headed off towards a point. It's just that point is kind of way off my screen.
So, but that point is also on the same line as this point, right? And that line that it's on is called the horizon line. Okay, so there is a line that's coming back here, and these lines are headed off towards that line. So let's learn what these lines are called and use the technical vocabulary. The key parts are this vanishing point. So lines that are on the sides of objects tend to head off towards the vanishing points. And the real key here in a lot of ways, and this works for most of the time, or for most lines, but things that are on the left side of an object, things that are on the left side of the object typically head off to the left vanishing point, and things that are on the right side of the object typically head off to the right vanishing point. Okay, the point to which lines converge. Okay, that's what the vanishing point is. The horizon line is the horizontal line that separates viewing from above and viewing from below. So if you look back here, you'll notice on the right side of the building, the lines are headed down as we go to the right. That would mean it's above the horizon line. Anything below the horizon line is actually heading up towards the horizon line and towards that vanishing point. So the horizon line contains the vanishing points, or point, depending on what perspective you are in. But yeah, so above, they're usually kind of headed down, and below they're usually kind of headed up towards those vanishing points. Just depends on what side of the line you're on. Okay, let's keep moving. All right, let's take a look at what defines one-point perspective. One-point perspective is very similar to a type of drawing we've already seen, that type of drawing being oblique. And the reason I'm comparing it to oblique is when you're drawing that oblique square, remember, you draw the front face first, and then you have these all parallel, headed off into the distance. In one-point perspective, you're drawing this front face, pardon my sloppiness here, and then you're able to take your line, and if these buildings are all kind of following that same line, headed off to that vanishing point. The line kind of budged a little bit, but I think you're getting the idea. Heading off to the vanishing point. Now all these lines at the top of the building, just like oblique, so you start with your front face, which has 90-degree angles, horizontal lines, vertical lines, and all these other lines are then headed off to the vanishing point. Now you don't have to draw the whole line, you just have to draw some of it. Again, we're below the horizon line, so the lines are heading up, and then above the horizon line, they're kind of headed down. Now you also notice the higher up above you get, kind of up above the horizon line, typically at any given spot, the steeper the line will be, the higher up you go. So all of these lines, the tops of these buildings, these doors, are all headed off toward that vanishing point. And this is a fairly realistic perspective that can be achieved for the most part, except for it's really like two-point perspective. It's just the vanishing point is way out of our field of view. The second one, it just looks like one point. So the front faces are rectangles. Lines not associated with the front faces converge toward a vanishing point. The only exception being the kind of the back and odd-shaped buildings and so on and so forth. But this is one-point perspective. Now, let's take a look at two-point perspective. Two-point perspective is lots of fun. So with two-point perspective, you have your 2 points, our two vanishing points, are right here and right here, and they are on a horizon line, which you can actually see the horizon line that connects those 2 points. Lines, non-vertical lines. So we have all of our vertical lines. There are lots of vertical lines in the drawing. You have the edges of the buildings, the edges of the windows, the edges of the door, the trees. All of these represent our vertical lines, anything that would be upright. And then you have your lines that are headed off to the vanishing point. So how many lines are headed off to this right vanishing point? Bet there's a lot. So you just look at the right side of any building, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? You could sit here and count all day. 7, 8, this door, the floor, the sidewalk, all of these things are headed off towards that vanishing point. The tops of the windows. It's really amazing way to draw. The edge of this little window right here, even that tiny little edge, is headed off toward that vanishing point. Now the tops of the buildings, the right side of the building, headed to the right vanishing point, so on and so forth. So you can sit and draw these things all day, and it's going to give you a realistic kind of perspective of what you're looking at. Okay, now the left side of the building is headed to the left vanishing point. You'll notice there's this line of the trees. If you draw the bottoms of the trees and the tops of the trees in between, that way they're going to have the kind of the same height if they were in the real world, right? They're scaling down as they shrink out of the field of view. Yeah, so amazing. Windows, now even though this is way on the right side of our screen, it's still on the left side of the building. So believe it or not, that's still headed off to the left vanishing point. You can see it following with the windows and so on and so forth there. This is two-point perspective. And the key parts of two-point perspective, there are usually no horizontal lines, and all the lines are headed off to a point. So when I'm drawing in two-point perspective, I typically start with this edge. Boy, that sounds an awfully lot like isometric drawing, okay? So sounds an awful lot like isometric to me. Headed off to the edge. Super. All right, let's take a look at some drawings and then identify what point perspective they're in. Let's take a look here. Let's identify the horizon line and the vanishing points. Now I'm going to try and convince you here that they may be screwed up a little bit, but that's okay. So I'm following this line. It looks to me as though if I draw this line here and then let's go with the tops of these. It would appear to me that the vanishing point is not necessarily directly on the horizon, but it's pretty close. But that's okay. So all these lines are headed off, and it looks to me like they're all headed off to one point. The second point would be way, way, way off our screen. It's not necessarily really worth talking about. Also, maybe these stairs aren't square, but if you follow that one and you follow this one, kind of headed, they seem relatively flat when you're looking at that. But it's just very tiny changes. So this to me looks like it's in 1 point perspective. We have it, that point at the center of our image. Basically, if the vanishing point is in the center of your image, it's going to be 1 point perspective. If the vanishing point is elsewhere, it's going to be in kind of a multiple point perspective. There's a very famous painting by Raphael. This is the School of Athens. So let's go ahead and take a look here. This is a very famous perspective painting. Where do those vanishing points head off to? Where do they make us look? Make us look right in between these two gentlemen. So many lines, right? All these lines are headed right to those people. So those people, when we just first look at the image, those people stand out tremendously, right? We can see those people are definitely important, and you can even see it in the decorations that are present on the side of the wall. These lines, everything is headed off to 1 point, so I would say that this is 1 point perspective. Look at these little triangles here. Those are headed off. Raphael did an absolutely amazing job captivating us with his 1 point perspective drawing at School of Athens. Other famous ones, the Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper. Everything's headed towards Jesus' forehead here, And if you look at the horizon in the background, you can see that it falls right under that spot. Perspective, lines in the ceiling, so on and so forth. Okay, here's a photograph of one point perspective. Again, our vanishing point is really brought into light by these railings. So that we definitely see that as the prominent feature in the drawing. And we can see the screws, or the bolts rather, look like lag bolts in the decking. All right, so a good fun exercise, trying to figure out where the horizon line is, so you can kind of take a prediction as you're coming down, and it's really where you see these lines transition from angling down to angling up. So if you go through the tops of the windows, you know, this looks like it's angling down slightly. This maybe just slightly, but this almost looks like it's angling up. So the horizon line's got to be somewhere in this window. So it's like these are angling down, these are angling up. It's somewhere in here is where the horizon line is going to be. All right, this one is particularly strange. You have lines coming down this direction. It's kind of fading off, so you have a vanishing point right here. You have a vanishing point right here, but I don't know if you can see, but these buildings are also headed off back this direction, and you have you know, this line coming up to here, I guess, but the lines are curved. This is more of an artist rendition, or artist attempt at putting 3 points, vanishing points on the same image in the frame, which looks a little warped and kind of distorted as far as it being real. However, this last one is very much realistic looking. You can see if our horizon line, where is it at? So where are these getting flat? Or maybe right about here. So let's see if we can find it. If we connect the tops of these buildings, the horizon line is definitely off our image. So we come through here, we can see that the line's headed off, kind of way off to the left, and then over on the right hand side, if we follow these lines, you're able to see that the vanishing point, we're getting really close with this, so it's probably somewhere in here, our vanishing point. But this is in 2-point perspective. Most of the other ones we've seen, that was 3, this is 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. This is 2-point perspective at its best. And you can see that this line here, as we head on this kind of rooftop line, these lines are getting closer together. So realistic 2-point perspective, the most realistic drawings are going to have the vanishing points kind of off the page, I guess, if you're looking at a close-up. But it's really prominent here. You can see the higher up you go, the more extreme the slanting of the line becomes. Really liked this one a lot. So we're now going to take a second and we're going to be drawing your initials. So my initials are, so write out your initials in capital letters or bubble letters, that's what we call them. You may have called block letters. You can, if you have 2 initials that are the same, feel free to substitute one of them out for a different letter, and that would be encouraged so that you don't have to draw the same letter twice. Okay. Yeah, this is not a Scottish man cursing. These are my initials, okay? So these are my initials, and I want to draw them. I'm going to draw them in 1-point and in 2-point perspective for you. So we'll do 1-point first. I'll do maybe the A in 1-point perspective. Might do the R also, and then I'll do the S and the A in 2 points. So I'll do A and the R in 1-point, and the A and the S in 2-point, so you can see those. So let's first do 1-point perspective. Okay, when you're starting to draw in 1-point perspective, it helps to have your vanishing point set up. Okay, now when you're drawing in, just a sec, actually, I'm gonna bring that down a little bit. When you're drawing in 1-point, I just draw your initial draw it like you would just drawing a regular old bubble letter. So I think before you begin this assignment, make sure you have your initials kind of drawn in block letters before you begin. So you're going to write this out like so. So here's my first initial. And then what you're going to do is, if you have a ruler, you're going to line that ruler up with each corner to kind of draw. And I'm going to use these as a guide. But the edges of my letter, all of them are going to be kind of headed off in this direction, like so. So this corner, we'll be able to see this crease. We'll be able to see this crease, and I think that's all of them. It's all the corners. That one will be hidden. We won't be able to see it. So then now what we do is we can take our pen and we can come and draw a horizontal line across to give us thickness, and then a horizontal line down like so. And then we can use this as a guiding line to connect those lines. Coming across here, we don't need to do that one. We do need to do this one and this one. And I don't know how thick that line is, but it's pretty thick, so maybe we'll go like that and then draw it up. Okay, and then what we can do is come back when we're done, highlight these lines and go through one by one and delete them if we need to. So if you're down below the horizon line, that's what your initial letter in one-point perspective will look like. I said I'd also do the R. So what I'd like to do now is draw the R, but I'm going to draw it a little bit larger. And let me try and make that straighter. It's really hard. I'm going to draw it a little bit larger, and I'm going to draw it so it's split. So the R now is both above and below the horizon line. So the top of the R is above the horizon line, and the bottom of the R is below the horizon line. And we have our notch out of our R. So we have to figure out, grab our line tool. You can use your ruler, and you're just going to line it up. And we want the edges of our R to head, so it's the left edge, right? We want it to head off to that vanishing point. This is above, so we won't see the bottom edge, but we will see the top edge here, and this one as well. I think that's everything. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, and the other two are hidden. So to draw here, we're going to give it our thickness. The R is going to have a thickness, so we're going to bring that down right here, just between those lines. Connect the dots and connect the dots. How thick is that? Pretty thick. Maybe it's just barely shy. It's hard to tell. Give our thickness there. And maybe we have our thickness there. It's hard to tell. We can come back and finish pumping those in. Okay, so that's 1-point perspective. Looks pretty good, huh? I think so. Now with 2-point, it's basically the same thing, except instead of these being horizontal, you're having these kind of head off to another spot. And 2-point is a little trickier, but we're going to get that set up and so you can see it. Two-point perspective. So we're going to draw our horizon line. I'm going to put my 2 points down like so. And then I'm going to draw, what am I doing? The S. All right, so we're going to do the S. I'm going to do the S so it is over here. I'm going to do down below the horizon line. We're going to draw, and here's the trick for drawing 2-point. So you got to figure out whether you want your S to be facing to the left or to the right. It doesn't actually matter. I'm going to probably face it to the right. And so what you do is I'm actually going to grab a light color. So take a pencil and draw very lightly. And what you're going to do is you pick the height. I do this in yellow, which I know is kind of hard to see. You draw the height of the letter that you want. And then what you do is you're going to grab your ruler, and since this is the edge, right? Just like in isometric, you start with your edge. In 2-point, the edge here on this building is right there, right? There's our edge. So you start drawing with that edge and then kind of head off. The right side of the building goes to the right vanishing point, the left side goes to the left vanishing point, and so on and so forth. So let's grab our line tool, and this is the right side of my S. I'm using these lines as a guide, and I'm going to head off toward my vanishing point, like so. And then I can pick with my pen how wide I want my S to be. So I want my S maybe about this wide, and then I'm going to draw a line across the top and a line across the bottom. Now you're probably saying, why are you drawing a box? Let me switch my color. Drawing a box because I'm using this as a kind of like a little template for how I could fit my S inside of that box. Okay, so I'm trying to take this line, put it right here, this line, put it right here, so on and so forth. So I'm going to go through and we're going to do that. I'm going to bring this down like so. Bring this down, so I'm just drawing the edges of my line here. Bring that down, and bring this down. So I've just drawn this line, this line, this line, and that line. We're going to draw across the top. We're going to draw across the bottom. I'm going to pick, I'm going to use these kind of as a guide. I'm going to pick where I want. You could, if you really wanted to, you could use another line here to support, but you can kind of eyeball it, keeping it centered. So I'm going to have it come across right there, draw this line, come across right there. Again, I could be drawing lines that fade right there. So I've got my S drawn on this side. Now the issue is I need the vanishing points for the other side. So this is the other side. This is heading off to that point. This is heading off to that point. This is heading off to that point. These are down lower, so they're going to be a lot steeper, and that's probably the hardest part for people, is understanding that those get so much steeper, and this is also heading off. So lots of points on the S. This is a little bit harder of a shape. Okay, this is the top edge, so I'm going to create my thickness. So the thickness of the S is going to come down like that, and then it's going to break, and it's going to come down a little bit further, like so. And then the top is going to be heading off towards that vanishing point. So I can use another line as a guide to head off this way, and we can come through and delete these two. That's coming right there, and then I can use this line as a guide right here. It almost looks like it's bent, but it's just barely there. Okay, so we got a line right here, we got a line right there, a line right here, and then a line right here. Okay, great. Our S is looking pretty good. The only one we're missing is this headed off to the vanishing point there. So that's what an S looks like in 2-point perspective if it's drawn below the horizon line. Now we can go through and delete these fairly simply. You would be using your ruler again to draw these lines very lightly. Try and make them as clear as possible. And when we erase, we get quite the interesting result. Look at that. That's not too shabby. I think our S looks pretty good. All right, I'm going to erase this. And I'm going to do one all the way above. Remember, if you split, then the top of the letter has to go to the right, or the top of the letter, is, coming down, and the bottom of the letter is coming up. All of our, oh, I missed a line, didn't I? I missed this one right here. Okay, all of the letters Since it's below, they're all headed up to these vanishing points. But if it's split, some of them are heading up, some of them are heading down. You just got to be careful. Okay, now I'm going to draw my A up here, facing to the right. So we want it facing this way. So that's the edge of my A, and so now I can use my edges to draw the edge of my A here. So give it how I'm drawing my box for my A right now. These are vertical lines. None of these lines are slanted. Coming up, vertical, vertical, back down. Ooh, that's a little ugly. This line right here has got to be headed off to that vanishing point, so I'm going to use that as a guide. It's heading off. Try that again. There we go. This line has got to be headed to that vanishing point, so that needs to be slanted. This line also headed to that vanishing point, so that needs to be slanted. Now let's take a look at the right side. Headed off, closer to the horizon line so it's not as steep. Closer to the horizon line so it's not as steep. Here's the other kind of rule of thumb with perspective. When you have something below the horizon line, you can see at the top. When you have something above the horizon line, you can see the bottom of that thing. So we have lots of lines to draw for the A. Okay, so we want to give it a thickness. That thickness is going to go from this line up to that line, so that comes straight down like so. And then across like so. Give it a thickness. This edge, oops, this edge is headed off to that vanishing point. This edge is headed off to the other vanishing point. So heading off, oh boy, that's really thick. And then that's coming this way, headed off to the other vanishing point, headed off to this vanishing point. Line there, and then we can delete it and take a look at it. So that's how you draw on 2-point perspective. I recommend starting, if you're having trouble, I recommend starting with that edge of your letter and then drawing that box. The box is where you're going to be taking the letter you're trying to draw and trying to kind of stretch it and fit it in there. Just make sure all those lines are headed off to your vanishing points. All right, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. Drawing in perspective is a lot of fun, and I think your initials or 3 different capital letters are a great way to practice. The rubric for this assignment is on Google Classroom. Thanks for watching, and yeah, we'll see you next time.